Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with our latest gameplay and deck tech video to show you. In this series we highlight a random deck on MTG Arena, and it can range from a spicy homebrew to a tier 1 meta deck that is hot on ranked. And if you do enjoy these videos that we make, all I ask for you is to give a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, as I would greatly appreciate your support. Now, if you like the deck we're playing today, I'll leave a link in the details below so you can give it a spin for yourself on Arena. Keep in mind that these videos will be pure gameplay, no commentary style, so you can enjoy the game. But if you do want to hear my deck tech analysis and thoughts, I'll leave that at the end of the gameplay. So without further ado, let's take the deck that you see right now and get started.
Mind if I take my octopus for a walk? The ocean surges, life thrives. Nature flows with vigor.
Don't think you'll be needing that. I have some fine print to obfuscate.
And there you have it, everybody. That is our Phyrexian Surveillance deck. So you may be asking yourself, why are we looking at Surveillance now in the year 2022? Well, there's a couple reasons why. Even though we already have a good majority of the cards from the previous sets from years ago, there was actually one additional card that actually got the Surveil mechanic, which is Consider. I know just this one single card is really making all the difference? Not necessarily, because of course, Sheoldred is an extremely powerful and dangerous card, so that's why I wanted to just build a whole deck around here. But the good news is this deck is completely, as you saw, a budget deck. Well, actually only on Arena. If you try to build this in paper, I mean, that's your choice, but I would highly recommend to just keep this to just an Arena deck. But in any case, let's kind of go over again what the game plan is trying to do. As you saw, we're going to try to forcefully make our opponent lose all their resources by either destroying them, discarding them, using Surveil to kind of flip through and filter our deck to get to what we need that's essential, and then hopefully we just rock Sheoldred out to victory. So with that, let's kind of actually cover our two main creatures in the deck. Shambling Ghast, the single 1-mana zombie, but allows us to basically either make one of our opponent's creatures a -1/-1 when it dies, or we can create a treasure token. Obviously, of course, 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to put a treasure token because we want to hopefully ramp a little closer to what our game plan is. Sheoldred the Apocalypse is a 4-mana 4/5 Phyrexian Praetor with Death Touch. Whenever we draw a card, we gain life of 2, and whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. So, as you kind of can tell, once we get Sheoldred out on the field, she's a very powerful and also very frustrating card to deal with. Great stats, and also most of the time opponents are going to try to forcefully get her off the field. So before you get her out, you want to make sure that you use your other cards to strip our opponent of resources until they're forced to top deck, so then hopefully we can get Sheoldred out and ride her again out to victory. To do that, of course, we'll have a bunch of support and control cards. So we'll have our course removal like Fatal Push, we have cards such as Sinister Sabotage to counter anything that's bigger. As far as our discard plan, we will have Thought Erasure, we have Dadriel Rogue Shadow Mage. As for Disinformation Campaign, we're actually going to utilize this enchantment multiple times, hopefully in the match. It only has 2 copies, but as you see right here, whenever we draw a card, an opponent discards a card, and whenever we Surveil, we return the Disinformation Campaign to its owner's hand. So with that, bringing it back to our hand after we throw out a Thought Erasure, after we consider, is going to be extremely powerful for us in terms of what we're trying to do. This is also the reason why we're going to throw Consider in. Great card draw, triggers of course Sheoldred, and of course the Surveil triggers the Disinformation Campaign. As far as additional support to the deck, we're also going to try to utilize Deadly Dispute. We actually don't have that many creatures to sacrifice with Shambling Gas, but it's pretty sweet if we can trigger it off on turn 2. We can hopefully get out a couple extra treasures to then again ramp into Sheoldred. Remember that also Deadly Dispute also triggers off of artifacts. So this is where we bring in Vampire's Kiss. This simple little card, only 2 copies of, allows us to drain our opponent for 2 and we gain 2 life. This is mostly for the stabilization, but also it has blood tokens with it. Creating 2 blood tokens is something that you shouldn't underestimate. By being able to then utilize them in the mid or late game, we can then sacrifice the blood token to discard and draw a card, which again also triggers Sheoldred, or we can keep them out on the field and then utilize them for Deadly Dispute to give us more options to take advantage of the card. But basically, as you kind of see, that's just the basic game plan. Nothing really super fancy. Again, this is a budget control deck, but we do want to make sure that we have also a little bit of extra options versus other threats out there. So we will have in the main deck a single copy of Ritual Sit and Extinction Event as your main Wraths. Hopefully you shouldn't have to then trigger Extinction Event on the even side if Sheoldred's out, but if you have to in a pinch, don't be afraid to do so if it ensures that you can win the game a couple turns later. And then finally, a single copy of the Eldest Reborn. This is kind of a double whammy card in the sense that we can either force our opponent to take the Edict effect and then they can discard another card. We can then bring back one of their powerful creatures or planeswalkers from the graveyard into the battlefield under our control, then we can possibly use to either attack them with, or we can Deadly Dispute them away for extra value. Or even on top of that, if say like one of our Sheoldreds is out and it gets destroyed, we can then use the Eldest Reborn to bring back Sheoldred as well. So we have multiple options of how flexible this single card is. Since we are a budget deck, going over our land base, we just have 5 islands, 9 swamps, some dismal backwaters, a single copy of Waterfront District. Same thing, after a little bit of time in the late game, we can also sacrifice it to draw a card, and some Maestro's Theaters also to instantly bring over an extra basic land. Also gives us an extra life, and of course, it triggers Fatal Push's Revolt ability. Very sweet to have. And as finally, the sideboard itself, Duresses for control decks, some Tyrant Scorns for some more spot removal and bounce effects for bigger creatures, a Languish for more variety and wraths, some Spell Pierces to deal with extra stuff in the early game, Cry of the Carnarium as a more lighter removal option, Ashiok Dreamrender to prevent any searching in our opponent's library, and also to mill and exile their graveyard to prevent those graveyard decks from doing any shenanigans. And then finally, some other cards that can give us some alternate win conditions. So, say like your Sheoldred plan is just falling apart, then you can swap out and then bring in the Scarab God and Liliana Dreadhorde General. Liliana, of course, can create zombie tokens, so it can help you go wide, and also by getting some extra card draw out of it if those creatures die. At the same time, the Scarab God kind of stacks up a little bit by making more bigger zombies that take advantage of Liliana, or we can also use its other ability to exile creature cards from a graveyard, then create tokens, so this also works as pseudo graveyard hate. Also, the final thing that's sweet about the Scarab God is every time it gets blown up, you can still bring it back to your hand. So the only way you have to deal with Scarab God is you have to exile it. So this does create a resilient second option if you go to best of 3. As for my final thoughts on the deck, I would highly recommend playing this in best of 3 because that's where you're going to get the most value out of this deck. But that's not to say that this deck is bad in best of 1. You just might run into a lot more aggressive decks, which the original version of this, as you can see, kind of has a bit of a hard time with, unless if you can get those Wraths in the early part of your starting hand. So if you have to mulligan, you're playing best of 1, don't be afraid to do so. I highly recommend you play this in best of 3 to get the most out of it. But otherwise, I don't know about you, but I actually had a lot of fun, of course, putting together another challenging deck with a condition, of course, making maybe a powerful control deck without spending a ton of mythics and wildcards. So thank you again for those that did watch this throughout the whole gameplay and the whole deck tech. I really do appreciate that you guys support me out there. If you do want to give this a try, as you kind of see again, of course, I leave that link below. If you do want to try other budget control decks, I do have a handful of other others that I've done throughout time, so check any one of those out. They're still pretty good, even though it's been quite a while since some of them have gone live. Either way, no matter what you try, whether it's control decks for the very first time and you don't want to spend a lot, or maybe you are on a budget on Arena and you don't want to spend those mythics and wildcards, but maybe you do like this style of gameplay, give this deck a try before you upgrade it, and even in budget form, I assure you, you will not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!